All right, so my guest on today's CCA Leadership Development Community interview series is Mallika Bender, the DE&I staff actuary at the Casualty Actuarial Society. Mallika, for this next little bit, I want to dive more into everything DE&I with you. Obviously, that's a passion that you have. It's what you do for your day job. So tell us more about your role as a DE&I focused actuary. Like what's the purpose of this? Why does CAS have this role, and what kind of things are you doing?
So I would describe my role broadly as having maybe 2 or 3 different areas of focus. So one of those areas is probably the traditional DE&I focus that most of us are aware of and possibly working towards in our companies. The effort is really around increasing the diversity of the actuarial profession, building up awareness of the profession as a fantastic career choice for people who are interested in math and STEM and business, and in particular among underrepresented groups who maybe like me didn't know someone or didn't go to a college that had an actuarial science major. So a lot of my work is around trying to craft the messaging that can draw those people in, trying to build partnerships with other organizations that have that network of students that are underrepresented in the profession, and to just find new ways to reach out and draw those students in and get them interested. So that's one piece. And then, if you think about the inclusion side, I see a lot of my time is spent on building relationships, talking to people and making sure that the CAS is positioned as an ally for groups and people and members who maybe are underrepresented or are vulnerable in some way, or feel that they're not included as much in the workplace or in the insurance industry. So, building those relationships with those groups and those members so that they know that they have support from the CAS. And then the third part of my job, big part of my job, which has been really exciting, is around looking at actuarial practice and how diversity, equity, and inclusion is relevant in that space. And in the last couple of years, what I've been really enjoying is managing the CAS approach to race and insurance pricing, which is all about looking at potential for bias in insurance pricing and understanding, what is the history that brings up those concerns? What have other industries done, and how could we build up the actuarial toolkit to be able to explore that more as individual actuaries or companies, to just continue to have an impact, right, on the world that we live in, and just to examine our own work product and continually sort of evolve how we work, or at least how we think about our work. So that's been really, really interesting to work on, and really to be part of the broader industry discussion about racial bias or potential racial bias in insurance.
It's really interesting. I mean, in some ways, you get more of the traditional DE&I focused discussions that we're probably all familiar with from a corporate perspective, and you're doing it at the professional level, right? And so I imagine you mentioned some of these other groups that I would assume, like the International Association of Black Actuaries, the Organization of Latino Actuaries. There's a South Asian network of actuaries. There's Abacus, which is focused on Asian actuaries. Those are the type of groups I'm assuming that you're interacting with within the profession.
Yep. And I'll just add in the Network of Actuarial Women and Allies and the Sexuality and Gender Alliance of Actuaries. And then even outside of that, I've had conversations with members of the CAS and also candidates who may or may not be going down the PNC route, who are saying, I'm interested in starting a group for people who identify like me, like a Pacific Islanders group or a Jewish actuaries group. So there's quite a bit of diversity already in our profession. And the challenge is really making sure that those people don't feel like they're alone, or that they have other people who have gone through similar things as they have and can identify, right? So wanting that connection and wanting to find people like you and safe spaces is really natural and normal. And so it's really awesome to see all of those groups that formed over the last couple of years to join International Association of Black Actuaries and Organization of Latino Actuaries, which already existed. It's been great to see all of those groups form and be able to connect within their own membership, and also to really form this big coalition of diversity organizations that all want the same goals and outcomes.
Yeah, I mean, it's really cool. And we've had a number of those organizations on prior episodes here, and it's really awesome, the stuff that they're doing. And there's lots of ways that that people can help and contribute. I know for OLA in particular, I just helped one of their student candidates that was working on his resume, right? Mm-hmm. So he had a resume, he sent it to me. I was able to go back to him with some suggestions on ways to improve it. And I just really love what they're doing to try to make these candidates be more successful, to land those jobs and get into the profession and hopefully stay there long term.
Right. And it's just about, candidates not having that person on their own, right? A lot of us have those people in our networks that will review our resume for us and give us those tips. But if you don't necessarily have someone like that, or you're the first person in your family to go to college, being able to provide that system of support that many of us had organically is so important. So the work that OLA is doing in their OLA Academy is really helping to fill that gap. And the other organizations are also doing really important similar work as well.
Yep, yeah, absolutely. I want to unpack the last point that you had mentioned about your role, specifically about race and insurance. There are some really good pieces out there on the CAS website dealing with the topic. What do you want other actuaries, regardless of their practice areas, to really know about race and insurance?
I think if I had to boil it down to just one short message, it's that we should never be ashamed to learn more and continue to update our assumptions, right, as we learn more about the world. So I think that sometimes as actuaries, we might get defensive and say, you know what, we have these standards, we're following these standards, and that means that we can, we aren't doing anything that could be perceived as biased or incorrect. And I think that our actuarial standards actually do create a framework within which we can continue to learn and examine and grow and evolve what we're doing, or at least be able to ask those questions, right, to interrogate our own work and confirm for ourselves that what we're doing is right and appropriate and working the way that we wanted it to work. So this research effort, at least this first phase of the 4 research papers that the Casualty Actuarial Society has published, are really just providing some foundational knowledge, right? History, what has happened? Why are people maybe raising concerns? How is the conversation going? What are the terms that you need to understand to be able to participate? It's not really focused on telling actuaries what to do. It's aimed at giving them the knowledge and some tools to start asking their own questions and applying their expertise to these different types of problems. And I think we can all be excited about that, about having a new challenge, or at least being able to look at our work with a fresh set of eyes.
And again, I'd highly encourage people to go check out the Casualty Actuarial Society's website and look at some of these pieces. But for those that maybe want the Reader's Digest version, can you give us maybe a few snippets about, you mentioned the 4 pieces that were already out there. What kind of things are they tackling?
So we have one paper called Defining Discrimination in Insurance, which goes over a lot of terminology that is being used in the current insurance industry debate, like unfair discrimination, proxy discrimination, disparate impact. And I know that, when you look at a paper that's about definitions, it can sound kind of dry and boring, but I challenge anyone to read that paper and tell me that they didn't find something fascinating in there. I think the really interesting part is just that we don't all agree on what these terms mean, right? And so if you're trying to have a conversation about topics like this, which are controversial or sensitive, and where people can really get, heated or defensive, having the same language or using the same language and meaning the same thing with the same words is really important. So that paper, just illuminates some of those differences and some of the context in which these terms come up to help us to think, where is the path forward? What are we actually trying to solve here? So that one is a fantastic one. We have one paper that looks at 4 commonly used rating factors: credit-based insurance score, geography, home ownership, and motor vehicle records, and just lays out some of the history of racial bias outside of the insurance system, which lends, or contributes to some of the concerns that consumers and regulators have around the use of those rating factors. And that doesn't mean that our use of those rating factors is inappropriate in any way, but again, it allows you to think about it more deeply, ask some different questions. Then we look at other financial services sectors like mortgage lending, where they've been working on issues of racial bias for decades, and just look at some of the solutions that have been put in place there, both government solutions and private industry innovation, to see, what could we learn or what lessons could we take from those other industries. And then there's a more technical paper on different statistical methods that one could potentially employ to look at their own models and see if there is bias. And I think what's interesting about that paper is that even among those 3 statistical methods, someone still has to decide what they think fair actually means. That decision, each one of those sort of fulfills a different definition of fairness, and none of them may be appropriate for the system that you're trying to build. And that's where the judgment comes in, right? And knowing, what do I think is fair, what is unfair, and how do I then evaluate bias in that context? So this paper gives you a few different tools, but there are a lot more out there. And it still takes somebody, making those decisions to be able to move forward with it.
Interesting. Oh, that's awesome. And I know we've had at least one request right now for the link to these papers that are being referenced. We can try to add that link to the show notes for this, but for people that are looking to navigate there, Mallika, where will they find these papers on the CAS website?
So they can go to the CAS website, which is casact.org. And then under the publications and research tab at the top, you'll see our research paper series on race and insurance, and that will take you to the landing page for all 4 papers.
Awesome. So from a leadership standpoint, what can leaders, whether they're current leaders or aspiring leaders, what can they learn from the DE&I work that you've been involved with?
So I think one of the biggest things that I've taken from this DEI work and just learning and growing myself is that you shouldn't be afraid to make mistakes. A lot of us in diversity, equity, and inclusion, trying to be inclusive can open you up to some mistakes, right? It's not easy. It's sort of a changing target. The language changes really quickly over time, and some people are using new language and others aren't. So, it can be easy to kind of shy away from trying because you don't want to offend anyone or make any mistakes. But I think trying to be inclusive and making an effort is better than avoiding it just to avoid errors. As long as you do that with some humility, right? And just be okay with making mistakes and learn from them, and be open about that, that you may mess up sometimes, but you can always learn and grow. And then the other thing that I've really been seeing, is this concept of allyship, with which I think most people have heard of or learned about if they're thinking about DE&I. And I've been thinking a lot about power, right? As leaders, we have different amounts of power than we did before. And it can be really easy to feel like you don't have the power that you actually have, But being an ally is really about using your power in a way that supports other people who have less power than you, right? So I would love to encourage leaders to just do sort of an inventory, right? Think about what power you have, or even relative power you have in different situations. And then think about who in that room or in that space doesn't have that power and maybe needs extra support, and how you can leverage your, influence or your resources or your social capital to make some change and make some positive impacts there.
No, those are really good thoughts. And as you were, saying this, I like the idea of what you said about basically just making an attempt, right? And learning from those mistakes, because inevitably there will be those, right? But I think as long as people see from a leadership standpoint, they see that you're trying and you're trying to make an effort and you're trying to learn from those mistakes, that's the type of blowback you might get from that versus not doing anything is very different.
Yeah. And I think I did this great training outside of, the insurance and work context around pronouns, right? And just using people's pronouns or trying to ask what people's pronouns are so that you can use them effectively. And we talked a lot about that, like making mistakes. It's so easy to make mistakes or forget that somebody uses different pronouns than you expected. And some people kind of shut down and say, like, I'm not even going to try. And others try and make mistakes a lot. And one of the interesting things that they taught in this training was, to just view a mistake that you make as a gift, right? It's like a learning opportunity. So if I say the wrong pronouns and someone corrects me, I can just say, oh, thank you for correcting me, and then move on and do it right next time, or make a note for myself, do what I need to do. But look at it as somebody's helping you to learn and grow. And there's nothing to be embarrassed about, right? We're all kind of on the same learning journey. So it's just, you're making an effort and you're making people feel safe to also make that effort.
And who doesn't like to get a lot of gifts, right?
Exactly.
I know I've got my fair share of them. All right, last question on this topic, Mallika. For those that aren't members of the CAS, how can they contribute to the work that you guys are doing?
So I'll start with the race and insurance effort that we're doing right now. We're moving into phase 2 of this effort. So we've published these 4 papers. That was our phase 1. We've been doing lots of education and creating educational opportunities for the last couple of years. But one of the areas of focus for our approach to race and insurance pricing is collaboration. So we're really always looking for other organizations and other people who are interested in working together with us. So I would say if you as an individual or you as an organization are interested in just having a conversation about what we could do or how we could collaborate, I would definitely welcome them reaching out directly to me and having that conversation. And then on the more traditional diversity work, the first step I would say is get involved in your companies, because as the CAS is working on increasing the diversity in that pipeline, hopefully you and your companies will be able to take advantage of that. That's the next step, right? If we build up the interest and the awareness in the pipeline and there's nowhere for them to go, then we ultimately don't reach any of our goals. But getting involved in your companies is a great step. Share what's working and what isn't. Again, I would love to hear from you if something is working. And then, of course, we do have volunteering opportunities to work with the CAS and SOA on diversity efforts. So we do joint events like Be an Actuary high school events throughout the year where we need tons of volunteers. And we have a lot of micro volunteering opportunities in addition to that throughout the year. So I would definitely encourage people to watch out for calls for volunteers. They get posted on LinkedIn, they get shared in our CAS weekly newsletters, and through a variety of channels.
So what's the best way for people to stay informed on that? I mean, is it following the CAS on LinkedIn? Or the joint committee? What's the best way for someone to stay informed about these opportunities?
So if you're a CAS member, we have an online community called the Diversity Impact Group, which anybody can add themselves to. Actually, you don't have to be a CAS member. You can just sign up for an account on the CAS website and join that group. And I actually send a monthly newsletter, which includes not just CAS volunteering opportunities, but events and volunteering opportunities in all of our partner organizations, including the JSEED and IABA, OLA, SAGA, NAWA, SANA, Abacus, anything that exists, anything that I know about, I try to share so that our members can get involved in a variety of ways. And then, yeah, I think following the CAS on LinkedIn or Instagram, we try to share the bigger opportunities out that way as well. So people will be able to find them even if they're not in those groups.
Excellent. Well, I'd highly encourage anyone that has any interest about race and insurance or DE&I, like these are great opportunities. So thank you for pointing those out.